Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take the sources you provide, notes, articles, whatever you've got, and really unpack them.
Yeah, we dig in to find those interesting connections, the insights that might not be obvious right away.
And today we're diving into materials you sent about a specific song. It's called Wo die Sonne blüht by an artist named Doza Crew.
That's right. And what we have here is, well, a collection, the lyrics themselves, an analysis piece looking at metaphors, and also a short description of the music style.
Okay, and what immediately jumps out from these sources is this kind of tension.
Right, exactly. They set up this picture of the song that sounds one way on the surface.
Almost innocent, maybe?
Yeah, perhaps. But then digging just a little bit, the sources suggest there's, well, another layer entirely, something quite different.
So our mission then is to trace how these sources build that argument. What do they collectively suggest about the meaning, especially this idea they float about adult themes?
Precisely. How do they get from point A to point B based purely on the information provided?
All right, let's start at that surface level you mentioned. How do the sources initially describe the song's sound and feel?
Well, one source calls it a sehr folklasteres Stück mit psychedelischen Klängen. So very folk-heavy, but with psychedelics mixed in.
Folk and psychedelic.
Okay. And another source adds something quite telling. It says, auf den ersten Blick vielleicht wie ein Kinderlied wirkt.
Ah, so it might seem like a children's song when you first hear it.
Exactly. So you get this immediate impression, maybe whimsical, folk-based, maybe a little trippy, but fundamentally childlike.
That's a really interesting mix to start with. Folk, psychedelic, children's song vibe.
It is. It sets an expectation. But this is where the sources, especially one of them, pivot quite sharply.
Okay.
They suggest it's not just about the sound. Source 1, for instance, it makes this very clear statement. It says, in Text jedoch klar wird, dass es Themen für Erwachsene geht.
Right. In the text, however, becomes clear that it's about themes for adults. That's quite a shift.
It's a huge shift. It moves the focus directly from the music's feel to the lyrics' content. And suddenly the question becomes, okay, how?
How do the sources back that up? What are these supposed adult themes?
And this is where the other source, the analysis piece, really comes into play. It basically picks up that thread.
Or the adult themes idea.
Yes, and starts connecting specific things in the lyrics to an interpretation that would fit that idea.
So it's trying to find the textual evidence?
Pretty much. It argues that the imagery, the story in the song, it can be read metaphorically, and it specifically suggests these metaphors might point towards, well, drugs or altered states of perception.
Wow, okay. So going from a children's song vibe to potentially drug metaphors, that's quite a leap. Does the source feel strongly about this?
It seems confident in its reading based on the materials. It states this interpretation is plausible und von den Quellen gestützt.
Plausible and supported by the sources. Okay, so let's get into the weeds then. How does that source connect the dots? What lyrics does it point to?
It really focuses on the descriptive language. Things like bunte Farbenlichter, colorful lights, or being in einem Zauberwald, wo die Zeit vergeht, an enchanted forest where time slips away.
Standard fantasy tropes, maybe?
You could see them that way. But the analysis suggests reading them differently. It also highlights meeting Wesen, die kein Mensch versteht, beings no human understands. You know, like a unicorn and a dragon described as ziemlich ulkig, kind of funny or odd.
Okay.
The source interprets these not just as fantasy, but as descriptions of Zustände veränderter Wahrnehmung, states of altered perception.
Ah, so the magic becomes a metaphor for a different kind of mental state.
That's the argument it puts forward, and it gets more specific. There's a line about a sprechender Baum, a talking tree,
Right.
that erzählt uns eine Meer von tanzenden Pilzen im blauen Berärchen Meer. Tells more about dancing mushrooms in a blue little berry sea.
Dancing mushrooms. Okay, I think I see where this is going.
Well, the analysis makes a direct link. It interprets this as a pretty clear reference to psychedelischen Erfahrungen, oft verbunden mit Pilzen. Psychedelic experiences, often linked to mushrooms.
Yeah, that phrase definitely lands differently if you're thinking along those lines.
It certainly does. And there's more. Another line mentions floating among stars with Feenstaub and Mondschein, fairy dust and moonshine.
Fairy dust.
The analysis points out that Feenstaub, fairy dust, is sometimes used colloquially for pulverförmige Drogen, for powdered drugs.
So another potential double meaning layered in there, according to this interpretation.
That's what the source suggests, yes.
Hmm.
It's building a case based on these cumulative details.
So specific images, potential wordplay. What about the overall story? Does the journey itself fit into this interpretation?
It does, according to the analysis. The source looks at the narrative arc. It starts quite peacefully, maybe on a fliegenden Teppich, a flying carpet, very magical journey beginning. But then there's a sudden shift. Doch plötzlich wird es dunkel, der Himmel tief und schwarz. Suddenly it gets dark, the sky deep and black,
A bad turn.
followed by falling. Wir fallen durch die Wolken. We fall through the clouds. It sounds quite jarring, right?
Definitely a disruption to the magical journey.
But it doesn't stop there.
Yeah.
The lyrics then describe flying through storm and rain, durch den Sturm und Regen fliegen wir. And then a light appears, ein helles Licht erscheint. And rescue comes via a giant eagle. Ein Riesenadler fliegt herbei.
So a difficult patch, then a resolution or return.
Exactly. And the source interprets this whole sequence, the initial high or journey, the sudden darkness and fall, the struggle, and the eventual emergence back into light or safety as a potential metaphor for a trip.
Like the ups and downs of a drug experience.
That's the plausible interpretation offered. The difficult parts, the bad trip phase perhaps, and then coming out of it.
So bringing all these pieces together, the imagery, the potential wordplay, the narrative arc, the source argues they collectively point towards this altered states interpretation.
Correct. That's the synthesis presented in the analysis. It concludes that, based on the textual evidence found in the sources it examined, this reading is, again, plausible and supported by the sources. It sees these elements as strong indicators pointing away from a simple children's tale.
Okay, so let's just recap this journey for you, the listener, based on what these sources presented. We start with a description. Folk song, psychedelic sounds, seems like a kid's song.
Right. That's the initial impression laid out.
Then a key source pivots, stating clearly the lyrics contain themes for adults.
That's the crucial term.
And finally, another source provides a detailed breakdown, arguing that specific images, the magical forest, the talking tree, the dancing mushrooms, the fairy dust, and the overall journey structure can be plausibly read as metaphors for altered perception or drug experiences.
You have a really interesting example of how analysis can suggest layers of meaning beneath the surface. And it's important we stress this again. This is all based on the interpretation presented in these specific sources. We're exploring the case they make.
Absolutely. This isn't about saying this is the meaning or what the artist intended. It's about seeing how analyzing the material, like these sources did, can totally shift how you might perceive something. It takes something seemingly simple and reveals potential complexity.
It really does change how you might engage with it.
Yeah. So the big takeaway from these sources is this kind of startling contrast. A song that sounds like a folk tune for kids potentially holding, according to this analysis, metaphors for adult experiences involving altered states.
The form and the interpreted content seem worlds apart.
They really do. And maybe that leaves you with something to think about. If you listen to this song, Sonne, blüht, knowing about this interpretation from these sources, does it change things for you?
Does that magical world feel different now? How does hearing about Tanzanian Pilsen land, knowing that potential connection?
Exactly. How does that childlike form interact with the potential adult content, as suggested by this analysis? It's definitely something interesting to consider.